Pony Courtship Rituals by Codex X Equus. Chapter 3. The Date, Part 1. A black chariot, pulled by changelings, sat in the middle of Canterlot's fanciest downtown restaurant district, blocking off most of the street. At this point, such a sight was so routine that only a few of the most curious ponies stood gathered around. One such pony, a small filly, crept close to one of the changelings that stood in the chariot's harness. She looked up at him in amazement and wonder, and then suddenly he turned, mouth opening to reveal pointed fangs and a forked tongue as he let out a long, fearsome hiss. With a squeak of fear, the filly scrambled back until she was safely behind her mother's legs, and then peeked back out, trembling slightly. The changeling blinked, staring after her with wide, puzzled eyes, then turned to the changeling harness beside him. "Is that always how ponies react when you say hello?" he chirped questioningly, and the other changeling sighed and put a hoof over his face. "You really need to get out of the hive more often." Both changelings faced forward again, trying to ignore the ball of nervous, vibrating energy that was sitting upon the seat far above them and flooding their hive mind link with panicked thoughts. Queen Chrysalis sat upon her haunches, breathing rapidly with her eyes widened and focused as she tried to calm her frantic nerves. Whatever reassurances she'd gotten from Cadence's advice and the help of her changelings had disappeared once she'd been airborne and left to her own devices. What if Twilight had already decided she didn't love her? What if she messed up this date somehow? What if Cadence's earring broke and Chrysalis couldn't hear her advice anymore? What if she'd had her chariot land on the wrong street? What if she'd forgotten the correct time and had already missed the dinner and now Twilight hated her again? Murmurs from the crowd caught her attention, and she looked up to see a royal chariot swooping down to land on the opposite side of the street from her own. Expecting to find one of the royal sisters upon its seat, she was shocked to instead see Twilight looking back at her. Concerns gone, she scrambled to her hooves and leapt down from her chariot, ignoring the cracks she left in the cobblestones as she galloped across to Twilight's chariot. "You made it!" she cried, prancing next to the chariot, and Twilight giggled. "Of course I did, silly. Did you really think I wouldn't?" No. Of course not." She stood there, lost as she stared at her love. Twilight had worn makeup, just to look special for this date. And she'd worn a blue dress, one that brought out the navy of her mane but was light enough to match her coat. Her jewelry was perfect, too. Gold might work on a pony like Princess Celestia, but silver was definitely a more Twilight's color. Finally, Twilight cleared her throat and shifted nervously. "Oh. Here." Chrysalis held out a hoof. "We should go inside. Let me help you down." "You really don't need to," said Twilight, a slight blush on her face as she got up from her seat. "But I want to." Chrysalis' heart raced as Twilight placed her hoof in her own, and she held it steady as the pony climbed down to the street. They stood there for a moment, gazing at each other. "I can't believe you actually got us a reservation here," said Twilight finally. "This is one of the most exclusive restaurants in all of Canterlot. They say even Princess Celestia has to call at least a week in advance." Most high-class restaurants in Canterlot made sure ponies knew they were getting what they paid for. Marble columns lined the walls, the tablecloths were made of silk, the silverware was actually gold, and so on. Others took the opposite approach, cultivating the appearance of a dive while still keeping prices high enough that most ponies would need to take out a second mortgage to pay for a meal. This restaurant, Les Actes d'Alimentation, stood out by doing neither. It was nice enough. The restaurant's name was prominently displayed on the awning over the entrance. Vines grew on its quiet and unassuming brick facade. But the clue as to its real nature was the maitre d' standing just inside the entrance, ready to turn away the unworthy. "Himph! I am the Queen Princess of Equestria," proclaimed the changeling proudly, putting a hoof to her chest. "A mere visit, and they were trembling and begging for me to dine in their establishment." "Aha!" Twilight rolled her eyes. "Well, At least I know the most you did is threaten a maitre d' or two, since I would have gotten a letter about it otherwise. And you know you're not supposed to call yourself a queen princess. Princess Celestia gets upset every time she hears about it. And, you're not supposed to declare yourself the queen princess of all Equestria. It's not just you. Oh. That's not what I meant. Chrysalis put a hoof to her mouth. You're a queen princess too, of course. That's... Despite herself, Twilight let out a small snort, trying to stop herself from smiling. All right, let's go. We can talk about it later if we need to. This is supposed to be a special night, after all. This time she was the one to hold out a hoof. Chrysalis blinked at it, then, slowly, reached out and took it. Your dress, said Chrysalis, as their eyes met. Oh? Yeah, yes. It makes you look frumpy, suggested Cadence through the earring. She'd allowed Chrysalis a few moments of tenderness with Twilight, but only because of the hope that letting her perform those small kindnesses would make the Changeling more susceptible to her pressure to insult the small pony. Dumpy. Dowdy. Like a mop bucket with a rag on it. Beautiful, finished Chrysalis. Oh. Well. Thank you. I'd say the same back, except you're not wearing a dress. Twilight gave a nervous swallow, looking away momentarily. But you don't really need one. Matching blushes on their faces, the pony and the Changeling climbed up the curb and passed through the doors into the restaurant together. As Chrysalis walked, she did her best to ignore the snorts of rage and grinding teeth that came to her over the earring. Chrysalis had made sure to get a private room in the restaurant for their dinner. Everything had to be just right, and having other ponies around could only cause problems, whether they were gawkers, ponies nervous at simply having a Changeling around, or even the rare occurrence of protesters. Getting to the room was accomplished with little trouble in this case meaning Chrysalis threatening the maitre d' with death, making snarky comments about the restaurant's decor, and suggesting that the restaurant might have larger issues with fire if any of their food were overcooked. Twilight had finally scolded her and told her to be nice, and the conciliatory apology she'd given had seemed to make Twilight happy. The room itself was small and intimate, blocked off from the main dining area by a thick velvet curtain. Inside, the room was lit by candles in wall sconces, and there was simply a table with 2 chairs. Lush carpeting met up with the edges of walls painted a rich red, and a painting hung upon one wall, depicting lush forest dappled with shafts of sunlight. Use your magic, whispered Cadence urgently as they moved towards the table. Pull Twilight's chair out from under her when she tries to sit down. It'll be a joke. Chrysalis glanced towards Twilight, an almost fearful expression on her face, then turned away, shaking her head quickly. You listen to me, Chrysalis, growled Cadence. I am trying to help you. Do as I say. Chrysalis stared straight forward, shaking her head even more frantically, and sat down in her chair, motions robotic. There was silence for a moment, and then Cadence's frosty voice came to her through the earring. You are on thin ice here, Chrysalis. The Changeling hunched over, burying her face in her menu, as though that could somehow block Cadence's voice from her mind. From a Changeling point of view, the menu was quite boring, very few pony restaurants served meat. But thanks to Twilight, Chrysalis' culinary horizons had broadened a bit. When it came to solid food, that is. And at least a few of the dishes didn't look gut-wrenchingly awful. It all looks so good, said Twilight cheerfully after a few moments of inspecting her menu. Really expensive, though. Angry whispers came through Chrysalis' earring. She bit her lip, trying to object, but the whispers grew more heated, and finally she looked up. Well, that doesn't matter to me. After all, you are paying. Twilight's mouth dropped open as she looked at Chrysalis in shock, and the Changeling sneered. What, do I look like I'm made out of bits? No, I just thought. It's fine, I can pay. She tried to give a cheerful smile. I have quite a bit of royal funding that I hardly ever use, not to mention a small income from all the papers I write and spells I create, so I'm not hurting for money. Order anything you want, it's my treat." Chrysalis stared across the table at her, heart melting all over again. "No, I didn't mean it like that." She reached a hoof across the table. "You don't have to." "Please." Twilight reached out as well, laying her hoof on top of Chrysalis. "I want to. It's the least I can do, after you put all this together for me." Chrysalis blushed as she locked eyes with Twilight. They held their hooves together for a long moment, despite the increasing volume of grinding teeth that Chrysalis heard through the earring. They ordered their meals, the waiter returning after a moment with the bottle of wine they'd chosen. Chrysalis popped the cork, pouring Twilight a glass before her own, and then lifted her glass as she set the bottle aside. "To you," she said softly, green magical aura around glass of red wine making a cheery sight. "To us," responded Twilight. She floated her glass forward to clink it carefully against the one held by the suddenly frozen Changeling. Chrysalis managed to regain enough control of her movements to tilt the glass in acknowledgement, and they drank. Twilight just sipped at her wine, she was giddy enough as it was. This was exactly the kind of date she had wanted from the beginning. No wrestling matches, no symposiums on new advances in griffing magical theory, even she had admitted that one had been a bad idea. No apple-picking outings that turned into them being chased off the property by pitchfork-wielding ponies, although Applejack had been very understanding about the whole incident once she'd calmed down. This was a classic romantic date. Dinner in a fancy restaurant, wine, a private room lit only by candles. It was just like in all the books she had read to prepare for this. Even better, it was with the Chrysalis she knew and liked. She was prickly and grumpy like always, and that just made the sudden doses of sweetness all the better. Chrysalis, for her part, took several gulps of her wine. She needed something to calm her jangling nerves. Everything had gone well so far, but experience had already proven that disaster lurked around every corner, even with Cadence's help. And those thoughts of her teacher and guide didn't help, either. She'd followed the instructions to make Twilight pay for the meal, but she had also ignored two of Cadence's other orders, and the seething silence coming through the earring now was frightening. Above all, though, the unknown was what worried her. She'd never been nervous before, and that was making it all worse. She was a queen, other changelings and ponies got nervous around her, she didn't get nervous about anything. The entire idea was ridiculous. But then she looked across the table at Twilight from over her lowered wine glass, and perversely felt herself calm slightly as she realized exactly why she was so nervous in the first place, because that was her queen sitting there. "I like your perfume," said Twilight suddenly, breaking Chrysalis out of her reverie. "Oh. Thank you. It's a really nice scent. I can't place it, but it's quite exotic." "Just a little something I had in my collection," Chrysalis replied nonchalantly with a wave of her hoof, even as she smiled with glee internally. "I knew Dead Manticore was the right choice." "So, how have you been?" asked Chrysalis after a moment. Twilight's compliment had been a huge boost to her confidence, but her hooves still fidgeted nervously on the tabletop. "Anything exciting happen recently?" "Oh, the usual. Pinky invented a new kind of cupcake that set things on fire. Spike's been moping around because Rarity went on a date with some stallion recently. Oh, and Rainbow almost got fired from the weather team for making clouds in certain suggestive shapes. Again. Nothing really new." "Ah. So, no exciting battles against villains trying to take over Equestria?" teased Chrysalis, and Twilight snorted. No, everything's been all quiet on that front." She lifted her wine glass to take a sip, and gave Chrysalis a glance over the top of its rim. "I think they're all too scared of the big, mean villain that seems to have taken up permanent residence here." "I think you forgot to add beautiful and intelligent, too," said Chrysalis, giving a toss of her mane and winking. Twilight chuckled, but then quickly sobered up. Actually, I am worried about something along those lines, but it's more of a domestic political thing. Oh? Yes. How have your changelings been doing, trying to fit in? Ah. Chrysalis leaned back in her seat. You're talking about all the protests? Yes. Not all ponies are happy to forgive you after what you did, and tried to do. Chrysalis let out a dismissive snort and rolled her eyes, and Twilight frowned. Don't be that way. I'm trying to help you and your changelings, and your attitude is not helping. The fact that I had to apologize for your actions on your behalf only hurts things as well. Most ponies had been terrified to learn of the wedding of one of their princesses to the queen of the changelings who had attacked their kingdom, fearing it was another ploy. The actual wedding itself, along with the obvious support of the other princesses, had quelled much of that fear. But no matter how much harmony and friendship Equestria held, there would always be some ponies who distrusted such obvious outsiders. It didn't help that the changelings were hard and dark compared to the soft and bright ponies, nor that they could only speak in hisses, snarls and clicks in their natural forms. Beyond that, it was just hard for even the most forgiving ponies to put the invasion behind them, and when a pony wasn't inclined towards forgiveness in the first place. To the shame of the princesses, and most of the rest of Equestria, a number of protests had cropped up, demanding various things. The banishment of all the changelings being a popular goal, but worse ones as well, up to and including the impeachment of the princesses for even considering amnesty, and the execution of Chrysalis. Naturally, the princesses were disinclined to listen to these demands. Especially the latter, in Twilight's case. One particularly egregious protest had resulted in a mad scramble through ancient legal documents to prove that it was actually illegal for a princess to destroy any part of Canterlot she wished, provided no life was lost and the damages were repaid. But at the same time, they could not forbid the protests, free speech being cherished in Equestria as it was, and they had to just counter the protests and attempt to sway public opinion in their favor as best they could. At least when a protest descended into violence, arrests could be made, but that was an outcome no one wanted to see. Fortunately, no changelings or ponies had been hurt, at least so far. I don't have anything to apologize for, sniffed Chrysalis dismissively, turning up her nose. I do what I need to do to feed the hive. That is all that I care about. What about me? Asked Twilight, and Chrysalis gave a little jump. I mean, you did attack my kingdom, all of my friends and family. Why, you didn't even know about me at the time. What if we had never met, and I had gotten hurt in the attack? That's not fair, huffed Chrysalis, crossing her four legs. You're asking about something I couldn't possibly have predicted. Okay, fine. Then what if you had known about me? What if you had met me before even beginning the invasion and fallen in love with me? Would you have still gone through with it? Chrysalis looked at her for a moment, then grinned widely, fangs dripping venom. Without hesitation. I would have redoubled my preparations if I had known about you Beforehoof. I would have taken no prisoners and allowed no chances at failure, and I would have made you mine. Twilight stared back at her, mouth struggling. You're terrible, she said finally, trying to hide her smile and blush behind the hoof. And that's what makes me so irresistible, isn't it? Chrysalis asked, tilting her head to give Twilight a sultry stare. With a bit of effort, Twilight managed to get herself under control, and gave Chrysalis a stern look. What it makes you is in danger, Chrysalis. You and your changelings. These protesters aren't just going to go away, and some of them have been making threats. You do know that there are anti-changeling groups forming, right? Some of the reports we've been getting about them are frightening, too. They've been talking about actual violence. I'm sure it will be fine, said Chrysalis unconcernedly, shrugging. How can you be so calm? Because we're not going to let them actually do anything. What? Twilight glared suspiciously at Chrysalis. What do you mean? We're the ones who formed all those anti-Changling groups, replied Chrysalis smugly. What? There was a flash of green light, and suddenly Applejack was sitting at the table across from her. Well, shucks, partner, this ain't our first rodeo, you all know what I'm saying? Yeehaw, Ippy-KJ. Stop that, snapped Twilight, and Chrysalis switched back into her true form. I told you not to change into my friends. And your Applejack is terrible, anyway. She glared at Chrysalis until the Changling hung her head, and then nodded. That's better. Now, tell me exactly what you've been doing. As I was trying to say, we know how all this works. Ponies are so distrusting, just because you want to imitate their loved ones and feed off their love. Yes, imagine that, said Twilight dryly. We knew what to expect when we decided to try integrating with Equestria. Even if we hadn't, it's not too hard to guess how ponies would react to our presence. You talk about what a shame it is that your ponies are protesting, that they fear the unknown, but that's just normal behavior. We've seen countless civilizations over the centuries, all across the world, and ours is no exception. She held Twilight's eyes for a moment, then continued. These anti-Changling groups were going to form anyway, so we simply formed them first. We're the leaders of the groups, we direct their actions and control their moves. She smiled evilly. We keep an eye on them, keep ourselves safe. And if a member or two happens to be a little bit enthusiastic, we arrange things so that they stop being a problem. What do you mean? Chrysalis rolled her eyes upward, expression innocent. Did you hear about those ponies who tried to firebomb a Changling-owned store downtown? You didn't. The royal guards showed up just in time, didn't they? What if they hadn't? Someone could have lost their business. Or even gotten really hurt. But they didn't. Chrysalis gave Twilight an uncomfortable look. We're being careful, Twilight. For you. Twilight groaned and buried her face in her hooves. Thank you, but don't do anything like that again. Nothing that could even possibly hurt a pony. An angry sigh came from the Changling, but she nodded. Fine. And I want to tell you to stop leading the anti-Changling groups, but it is keeping your Changlings safe. Then why would you want us to stop? Asked Chrysalis, looking puzzled and almost hurt. Because it's just so evil, cried Twilight. You're using your shape-shifting abilities to manipulate ponies. That's wrong, even if it is for a good reason. Sometimes I don't understand you ponies at all, said Chrysalis softly, shaking her head. I know. I feel the same way about you. Twilight's head was bowed, but then she raised it and gave the Changling a trembling smile. But I do like learning about you, so that I can understand. Chrysalis smiled back. I've found I actually feel the same way. They made small talk for the next few minutes, just a meaningless talk of two ponies who like to be around each other. And when they ran out of things to say, they didn't have to say anything. Just happy to be together, they sat in comfortable silence. Aside from Chrysalis humming, of course. They were almost disappointed when the waiter returned with their meals, but the chefs had lived up to their reputations. Twilight had a salad made from what seemed to be the lushest, greenest lettuce ever grown. Crisp tomatoes and cucumbers decorated the leaves, along with a few rare and expensive truffles. There was even a sprinkling of pepper in her dressing, just the way she liked. Chrysalis, meanwhile, had a plate that seemed to be dripping with sap apple jam. From experience, though, Twilight knew there was a pile of other vegetables underneath all that jam. It really was one of the most expensive things on the menu. Zap apple jam was not cheap, there being such a limited supply of it. But it was one of the few vegetarian meals Chrysalis truly enjoyed. and Twilight decided it was worth the bits to see the changeling so happy. "You keep eating food full of that much sugar and you're going to lose your fangs," observed Twilight. She might like to see Chrysalis happy, but that didn't mean she was above some friendly teasing. "Well, what can I say? I like to eat sweet things." Chrysalis gave her a smoldering glance across the table, running her tongue slowly over her lips. "Although, I haven't gotten a taste of the sweetest thing in the room yet." Okay, let's just eat," said Twilight, a flustered blush on her face. They ate eagerly, talking little besides sounds of pleasure at the taste of their meals. What they did say consisted mostly of Twilight raving about how good the food was and complimenting the chefs, and even Chrysalis grudgingly admitted her meal was delicious. They were partway through the meal when Chrysalis suddenly jumped, nearly sending her wine glass flying. "Are you okay?" asked Twilight, concern clear on her face. "Oh, yes, I just..." Chrysalis coughed into her hoof a few times. "I just got something caught in my throat." She gave Twilight a wide, uncertain smile. "All better now?" Twilight looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded and resumed eating, while Chrysalis looked down at her plate. "Don't pretend you can't hear me," came Cadence's voice over the earring, silicon with fury. "Do what I say." But everything's going so well," Chrysalis whispered quietly but intensely into her meal. "I just want to talk with her a little more. Please, don't make me do this." "I am trying to help you here, Chrysalis." Cadence had abandoned all pretense at kindness and was simply shouting orders now. "This is your last chance, and if you don't do this I am done with you." Chrysalis remained staring down at her plate. "Now pick up her food and throw it on the floor, then tell Twilight dinner's over. It's time to move on to something else." The changeling's breath started to become ragged and she shook her head, but otherwise didn't move. "Pick up her food, Chrysalis, and dump it on the floor." Slowly, Chrysalis brought her hoof up to her plate. She held it there for a moment, then raised it further and pulled the earring from her ear. "Chrysalis? Chrysalis, what are you?" Cadence's voice faded as Chrysalis moved the earring down and dropped it on the floor. She hesitated for a second, then brought her hind leg down, grinding the earring under her hoof. There was a crunch and a brief flash of magic dissipating into the air, and then nothing. Twilight looked up as she saw Chrysalis' body jerk with the force of the stomp, and felt the slight tingle of magic. "Chrysalis? What was that? Are you all right?" Chrysalis continued to stare at her plate, getting her breathing back under control, then looked up. "Yes, Twilight. Everything's fine." She smiled. "Everything's just fine, now." Cadence's head jerked back as the image of Chrysalis' hoof grew large on the crystal ball's surface, then there was a squeal of magical feedback and the crystal went blank. She stood there for a long moment, staring unbelievingly at the dead crystal ball. She didn't. The crystal ball remained totally, tauntingly empty of any images. She didn't. There was an explosion of magic, as Cadence summoned her regalia to herself and her hair twisted about her head, styling itself back into its usual regal form. That arrogant, insolent little bug. She walked to the balcony door, kicking it open and striding out. Silence descended over the street below as the passing ponies looked up and beheld a princess blazing with righteous fury climbing up onto the railing outside her room. "Fine, then," she bellowed. "If I have to bring the love myself, I will." She kicked off from the balcony, spreading her wings and sweeping out over Canterlot. Their meals had been finished and the plates taken away, but Chrysalis and Twilight had remained at their table, chatting happily for several minutes. "Thank you for this night, Chrysalis," said Twilight finally. Don't say anything else, Twilight, please." Chrysalis reached across the table towards her, eyes pleading. "I have so much more planned for you tonight, so much more I want to show you." It's okay, Chrysalis. Twilight laid her hoof on top of Chrysalis once more. I understand how special you want this night to be, and it has been, even just this meal. Anything you want to do, I will. She smiled. But maybe we could delay your other plans a bit. I like just sitting here, talking to you. Of course, Twilight. Anything you want. They looked at each other, then, at the same time, both moved forward, leaning across the table towards each other. A commotion suddenly interrupted them, and they sat back. Muffled voices came through the curtain blocking off their room, strident at first then changing to a nearly inaudible apologetic tone. More murmurs arose after a moment, with what sounded like a few angry shouts, and then the sound of multiple tramping hoofs that slowly faded away to silence. Chrysalis and Twilight looked at each other. What do you think that was about? Asked Chrysalis, arching an eyebrow upwards. I don't know, but I kind of want to see. It might be trouble. Chrysalis sighed and rolled her eyes, but got out of her chair as well. The trials of being married to a curious pony, she muttered under her breath. Still, Twilight had been right about the possibility of Changlings being in danger in the city. The chances of something happening here was remote, but better to be safe. Twilight started to draw back the curtain, then paused. Listen, she said in a hushed voice. Do you hear that? They both listened, cocking their ears towards the slight gap in the curtain. There were no sounds, none at all. Not the clink of silverware on plates as diners ate their meals, not the murmur of patrons conversing quietly, not even the muted chaos that always leaked out of a restaurant's kitchen. Chrysalis and Twilight looked at each other again, then slowly pushed their heads through the curtain. The entire restaurant was empty. It was completely devoid of both customers and employees, but there were signs they had been there recently. Nearly every table had a meal on it, all in various states of having been partially eaten. Carts of desserts lay scattered about like abandoned carriages, and trays of food looked to have been hurriedly placed on the ground. Most tables appeared pristine, but a few chairs were knocked over, and one or two evening coats remained on seats. What is this? Asked Chrysalis quietly, emerging from the curtained doorway with Twilight right behind her. Did all the ponies disappear? Is that something ponies can do? This better not be the rapture, said Twilight grumpily. Celestia promised me there was at least another 3 millennia left. Oh, don't worry about all this, said a voice that caused both Pony and Changling to jerk around. I just figured we could use some privacy for what's about to happen. From the entryway, Cadence trotted in, beaming happily. Cadence. Cadence? The three stood for a moment in silence, Cadence with a smile on her face, Chrysalis looking worried and surprised, and Twilight just looking surprised. Finally, Twilight looked at Chrysalis. Was this your doing? She said slowly, nudging the Changling with an elbow. Did you bring her here to meet us, finally? I think I did, said Chrysalis slowly. I'm going to go say hello. Twilight started to move forward, then stopped and looked up at Chrysalis. Oh, I mean, if that's okay. This is our special night. I shouldn't just run off to greet some pony, even if they are a friend. No, it's fine. Go ahead. Chrysalis watched as Twilight trotted across the empty restaurant, gnawing on her lip as fear gnawed at her innards. What was Cadence going to do? Was she going to? Chrysalis let out a little gasp. Was she going to tell Twilight about the help she'd been giving her? Was that going to be her punishment for destroying the earring? And if it was, how would Twilight take it? Would she be flattered that Chrysalis cared so much about her that she had sought out the Princess of Love herself to help win her heart, even though they were mortal enemies? Or would she be furious when she realized that all the romantic pony things Chrysalis had done had actually been Cadence's ideas? She held up a hoof, wanting to call Twilight back, then dropped it. If there was one thing she had learned about ponies, It was that they didn't like lies. It had explained so much of their dislike of changelings, whose entire lives were built around deceit. Maybe it would be better if Twilight found out now. Better to end it all here than have years of happiness turn to bitterness, regret and hatred. Chrysalis tried to convince herself that was true, and couldn't. But she did trust Twilight. And she loved her. Whatever the pony felt, she would accept it. Cadence. Twilight bounced to a halt in front of Cadence, and began to do a dance. Sunshine, sunshine, ladybugs awake. She stopped, to let Cadence continue their traditional greeting, and the other princess obliged. Almost. I am here to make you and your wife separate, sang Cadence cheerfully. She smiled down at Twilight as the smaller pony slowly backed away, fear and confusion beginning to grow on her face. I know, it's not very good, is it? Sorry, that was the best I could come up with on such short notice. Chapter 4. The Date, Part 2. Cadence? Asked Twilight warily once she retreated to a safe distance. Cadence, what are you doing? I'm here to help you, Twilight, she said softly, taking a step forward. I'm the Princess of Love. I know what you want, what you need. I'm going to save you. I don't understand. Save me from what? From me, said a soft voice, and Twilight swung her head around to stare at Chrysalis, who stood with her entire body drooped and her gaze averted. I told you I would win your heart, but I didn't have any idea how to. I don't know how to create love. So I went to Cadence and I. The changeling gagged, one hoof going to her mouth, but she managed to keep her bile down and continued. I asked her for help. To help me make you realize how much I'll love you, how happy I could make you. She's been giving me advice this whole time, telling me what to do on each date. So all those things you did, said Twilight slowly, all the terrible things you did during our dates. They were because I was weak. Because I couldn't do what Cadence told me to. She turned further away, something that sounded suspiciously like a sniffle coming through her mane. If I'd just listened to her, if I'd left you alone after I walked out on our first date instead of taking you away the next night, then maybe. Wait. Twilight held up a hoof, a look of horrified comprehension dawning on her face. Cadence told you to leave me like that. Of course, sniffed Chrysalis. That way you'd be more interested in me. She called it playing hard to get. Cadence, growled Twilight, turning back to the other princess. Do you see it now? Asked Cadence, nearly whispering, a serene smile on her face. She doesn't love you. She can't. Look at how easily she threw away her supposed love, how easily she listened to what I told her and hurt you. Cadence took another step forward and held out her hoof. Come here. Come to me and this whole nightmare will all be over. Twilight gave her a furious glare, eyes tight, then spun around to march back to Chrysalis' side. Don't turn your back on me, Twilight, said Cadence warningly, but the pony just ignored her. Chrysalis? Twilight spoke gently, reaching out a hoof only to pull it back at the last second. Chrysalis, are you telling me that every time you insulted me, every time you ignored me or said something cruel, when you left me during our first date, that was Cadence telling you to do those things? Of course. Chrysalis gave Twilight a quick glance, eyes wet, then turned away again. She was trying to help me, but I couldn't. No, Chrysalis, no. Cadence was lying to you. She threw an angry look over her shoulder at her sister-in-law. I don't know why, but she was. You don't make a pony love you by pushing them away and hoping that makes them want you more. You make them love you by doing exactly what you were trying to do. by sharing your love with them, by showing them how much you love them, by treating them with kindness. Then. You mean? Chrysalis turned to meet Twilight's eyes, her own wide. When I left you at the restaurant on the date, and you wrote me that letter. I meant every word in it. I was furious. What you did was horrible, and I wanted nothing to do with you after that. Twilight, eyes wet, mouth trembling, met the Changling's gaze. But then you took me on a date to the Canterlot Library, and then a used bookstore. The same way my mother did with my father. That wonderful, amazing night. It was a fluke. Spat Cadence. She did it by accident. She doesn't love you, Twilight. Twilight glanced at the look of understanding slowly growing on Chrysalis's face, then turned to Cadence. Are you telling me, she said in a low, angry voice, that everything Chrysalis did that was kind, and sweet, and caring, that was all her? And those terrible things, leaving me behind on dates, insulting my outfits and hairstyles. That was you, lying to her, Cadence? I wasn't lying to her, Twilight. I was showing you the truth. That is what she's really like. Twilight dismissed her again, turning back to focus on the Changling. So, when you ditched me on the date, you never wanted to? Of course not. Gasped Chrysalis. Why would I ever not want to spend time with you? All those times you ignored my suggestions about where to go on dates. Mostly her idea. Chrysalis gave a weak smile. You know, I actually wanted to go to the museum last month, too. They had their first exhibit with an artist who was out as a Changling. The dance contest? Asked Twilight breathlessly. Where you took a stallion as your partner, because you wanted to win? The only thing I wanted, more than anything else, was to dance with you, said Chrysalis softly, running a hold hoof through the pony's mane. And when I beat you in the dance contest and you set the building on fire. This time Chrysalis turned away, clearing her throat uncomfortably and refusing to meet Twilight's eyes. No, that one was all her, said Cadence from behind them. Not that I tried to stop her, mind you. And it's a bit disingenuous of you to say you beat her in that contest, Twilight. Just because she got disqualified before you did doesn't mean you won. So, all this time, said Twilight slowly, everything you did that seemed mean, or cruel, or uncaring, that was because you love me. Because you were following Cadence's fake advice to try and get me to love you. I just wanted you to love me so much, Twilight. Chrysalis's voice was low and hoarse. I'd do anything for you, and I guess that's why I was foolish enough to let her trick me so easily. Do you? Do you hate me? Twilight's response was to wrap her forelegs around the Changling and, forgetting her alicorn strength, squeeze so hard she would have hurt any other pony. Oh, you're just the sweetest thing, she cried, burying her face in the shocked Changling's mane. I'd never hate you, not for something like that. Chrysalis stared down at her, then slowly raised a hesitant hoof to drape it over the pony's neck. They pulled back, looking at each other, but before either could speak the sound of clapping hooves interrupted them. Well, bravo, she knows the truth now, said Cadence happily. But why don't you tell her the whole truth, Chrysalis? Chrysalis froze up, her body stiffening around Twilight. Chrysalis? What? What does she mean? Instead of responding, Chrysalis slowly removed her leg from around Twilight and slunk away, head down. Chrysalis, please. Oh, come on, Chrysalis, Cadence said teasingly. Why don't you tell her what you told me? Tell her why you didn't decide to marry her until after she became a princess. Twilight gasped, causing Chrysalis to flinch and shy further away. The pony turned, taking a step towards the Changling. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but none came. Oh, no, nothing to say. A giggle came from Cadence. Come now, Chrysalis, tell us how a simple unicorn who lived in a library wasn't good enough for you. A dead silence filled the air of the restaurant, none of the ponies moving. Chrysalis, said Twilight finally, then licked her lips, cleared her dry throat and tried again. Chrysalis, you can tell me. Please. I won't be mad. I just want to know. The hive has to be safe, said Chrysalis hoarsely. It has to be strong. So, my mate must be strong. You were strong, Twilight Sparkle. Brave, intelligent. Beautiful. But you weren't strong enough. You weren't a leader. And when it came to the hive, to my children, versus my heart, I did what I've always done, what I have to do. What's best for the hive. No matter how it hurt my soul, no matter how it killed me inside to have to turn my back on you. She raised her head, trying and failing to smile. I thought my heart would burst when I heard you became a princess. That I could finally, combine my duties and responsibilities with where my heart was leading me. The only thing that's ever made me happier was when I thought you had accepted my proposal. Chrysalis trailed off, and Cadence let out a snort. There you go, Twilight. The truth. If you weren't a princess, she wouldn't have given two bits about you. You were nothing more than a safety net, someone to deal with all those ponies that come seeking justice from her, someone to swat them away like they're nothing more than pesky flies. She sneered at the pony, whose head had dropped and now faced the floor. How do you feel now, Twilight? Still think a Changling can actually feel love? I'm so sorry, Twilight, Chrysalis managed to get out, her voice a husk of its usual self. I'll just leave. Twilight, with her head still down, started shaking. Princess and Queen stared at her, and then suddenly she threw her head back, laughing uproariously. Ha, ha, ha. That's the best you can do? She chortled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Do you really think I don't understand duty? That I don't understand responsibility and sacrifice? I may have only been royalty for a few years, but give me some credit. She got down on her haunches, gently lifting Chrysalis' chin with one hoof to look her in the eye. Chrysalis, I would never, ever ask you to put my happiness above that of your hive. Even if it meant 1,000 years of bliss for the two of us. I wouldn't see one single Changling be hurt. It may sound a bit cold, but putting your hive first was the right thing to do. You can't be serious, growled Cadence through clenched teeth. Chrysalis stared at her, face disbelieving, then squeezed her eyes shut with a happier smile, a single tear leaking out. I always knew you were the one, Twilight, she whispered. Are you kidding me? Cadence yelled. She stomped one hoof on the ground, the shock wave interrupting the two. Twilight Sparkle, you cannot tell me you actually love the Changling. Twilight gave Chrysalis her hoof, helping her back to her hooves. I don't know if I do or not, she said, missing the look Chrysalis shot her as she turned to face Cadence. But what do you think you're doing here? Why are you trying to force us apart? And with such dirty tricks. How could you do this to me? I'm doing this for you, Twilight, cried Cadence desperately. I'm trying to save you. She doesn't love you. Why do you keep saying that? Twilight shouted back, stomping her own hoof. You heard what she just said to me. You've been spying on all our dates. You had to force her to be mean to me. What about all the awful things she did? She set that building on fire. She laughs when she sees other ponies get hurt. She dismisses ponies she thinks are lesser than herself and insults them constantly. But she doesn't do any of that to me, Cadence. She does love me. And I don't like seeing her be so mean to other ponies, but she's working on it. For me. Because she knows I don't like it, and no matter what you say, she loves me. Cadence was shaking, head down and teeth clenched. Suddenly her head snapped back up. What about the park, Twilight? She pushed you in the fountain and tried to drown you. What? Twilight's frown of puzzlement turned into comprehension. Do you mean that night we went strolling in Canterlot Central Park? And she pushed me in the fountain and we roundhoused for a bit? Twilight giggled, sharing a smile with Chrysalis. That was just a bit of fun, Cadence. I dunked her quite a few times myself. But you were so scared after that, you couldn't even leave. You thought she'd hurt you if you tried. Cadence. I stayed with her because I was enjoying myself. We spent the whole night talking. She gave Cadence a puzzled look. You were listening, how did you not pick up on that? You caught a cold because of her. Twilight chuckled. That was my own fault. I got so caught up in talking to her that, well, I didn't even think about drying myself off or getting somewhere warm. She looked over at Chrysalis, who smiled back. And this big sweetie came to take care of me. Twilight, she force-fed you meat. Twilight's expression turned sour, and Chrysalis turned away, whistling a few innocent notes. Yes, while it was really nice of her to feed me soup while I was sick, I really wish she had told me it was chicken soup before I'd eaten most of it. Old Changling folk remedy, cried Chrysalis desperately. Chicken noodle soup is very good for colds. Don't you see, Cadence? Pleaded Twilight. She loves me. There's no tricks this time. No invasion. It's just love. It's not, Twilight. Cadence's breathing was ragged as she stared at the two standing side by side. It's not love. It can't be. Changlings cannot love. Period. How can you keep saying that? You've seen Chrysalis with me, you've heard what she says, you know how she acts around me. You have even talked to her in private about her love for me. And you know exactly what you've put her through over the last 6 months. Chrysalis put aside her pride to ask you for help, and even when you tortured her by making her do things that went against what she believed in, she kept it up, because she thought that's what she needed to do to earn my love. How can you not call that love? Because Changlings can't love, Twilight, said Cadence desperately. They just plain can't. Ponies give out love, Changlings eat it. It's one way. It can't go backwards. Why not? Thundered Twilight, and Cadence gaped at her in shock. You should know this better than anyone, Cadence. There is no limit on love. The fact that Changlings need more of it just means we need to give them more. And we should cherish what they give back. Cadence took an unsteady step backwards, shaking her head in a simple, flat refutation of everything Twilight had said. You're wrong, Twilight. You're wrong. And I'm doing this. I'm doing this for you, don't you understand that? You never asked for this. It was all a misunderstanding, wasn't it? Maybe she tricked you, maybe she didn't. It doesn't matter now. Just leave her, come over here to me. She said herself she'd agree with whatever you decided, so make the right choice and come to me now. I don't know if it is the right choice, Cadence, said Twilight softly, and the princess flinched back like she'd been struck. I don't know what the right choice is now. You have poisoned everything so much I can't see anything clearly anymore. I did what I had to, Twilight. She's not right for you. You shouldn't be in love with her. It's not right. That's not for you to decide. Love comes from what one pony feels for another, not from the decision of some third party. What gives you the right to decide that for me? For anyone? Twilight knew those words were a mistake as soon as they left her mouth. Cadence froze, then drew herself up to her full height. Her eyes were wide and cloaked in shadow as she lifted her head and her mane fell down over her forehead, but her pupils were highly focused pinpricks. "I am Cadence, Princess May Amora Cadenza, the Princess of Love," she said in a proud, cold voice. "I am love. I decide which ponies get to love each other, and which ones don't." She spat the final word from her mouth like it was something foul. "Cadence," said Twilight, careful to keep her voice calm as she retreated one hoof step at a time, using a wing to nudge Chrysalis along with her. "Cadence, that's not how being a princess works, and you know it. You were one of the ones who taught me, remember? Isn't it, though?" Cadence asked cheerfully, beginning to pace side to side. "Princess Celestia decides when the sun rises, Princess Luna decides when the night falls. Why shouldn't I get to decide who loves whom? Because love isn't predictable. It doesn't appear and disappear at the same time every day. It doesn't follow a cycle. Well, maybe it's time it did. Maybe it's time it was regulated, that it was given to those who deserve it, and taken from those that don't." Cadence's eyes moved from Twilight up to Chrysalis. "And who better to start with than the Queen of the Changelings?" "You can't," objected Twilight in a terrified whisper. "Why not? I can bring out the love two ponies feel for each other." Her grin turned into a sneer. "So who says I can't put it back? Who says I can't take love away when I see fit? She's a Changeling, Cadence. She needs that love to live. You'll kill her." "Oh, don't worry. I'll leave her just enough to let her crawl back to our little hive." Cadence's smile reappeared, mocking now. "Besides, I'm not going to take away all her love. Just whatever little delusions of love she might have for you." "I forbid it," declared Twilight. She stood up straight, her horn glowing, and a magenta dome formed over Chrysalis, leaving the Changeling blinking at the brilliant, cross-cutting light surrounding her. "Is this really what it's come down to, Twilight?" asked Cadence softly. "Are you really going to raise your horn against me? When all I'm trying to do is help you? When all you have to do is just walk away and no one will be harmed?" "I don't want to do this." "You're forcing me," growled Twilight. "I won't let you hurt my friend." Cadence stared at her for a long moment, then let out a dreary sigh and turned away. "Maybe." "You're right, Twilight," she said, voice barely audible. "I am the Princess of Love, after all. I don't even know if I can take love away. Even if I can, I probably don't even have it in me. My purpose is to give love, not take it." There wasn't even time for Twilight to let out a sigh of relief before Cadence spun back around, jabbing her hoof out at Twilight. "So let's give you some love," she bellowed. Twilight cried out as Cadence's magic gripped her body, cancelling out her own spell and making the shield around Chrysalis pop like a bubble. The magical aura dragged her across the room, knocking tables aside as she went, forcing the pony to raise her forelegs to protect her face. A dozen feet before reaching Cadence, she suddenly launched into the air and hung there, above Cadence's head, struggling in the magical field. "So how is it going to be, Twilight?" asked Cadence, grinning up at the pony past her outstretched hoof. "Ready for round 2 with Flash Sentry? Or maybe you want Fluttershy, instead? I'd hate to lose the pool to Pinky, but you two would go good together. Although, pretty much any pony at all works. Heck, maybe even a griffin or two. Just take your pick, and I'll fill you with so much love you'll forget the bug even exists." "Cadence. Please." Twilight tried to struggle, tried to cast the most basic of spells, but Cadence's magic had overwhelmed her completely. "Or, maybe I should just skip right to Celestia. It's a century or two early, but better safe than sorry." No. Cadence grinned wider, the glow of her horn ramping up in intensity, then she suddenly let out a cry as something impacted against her head with a skull-shuddering thump. When she opened her eyes after the momentary shock had passed, she saw Chrysalis, forehead equally bruised, pushed up against her face. "That's my wife you're bucking with," said the Changeling. Her twisted horn, locked with Cadence, gave off a flare of light, and the pulse of magic threw the princess back into a pile of tables. Turning quickly, Chrysalis caught Twilight in her magic, lowering the plummeting pony gently to the ground. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Twilight let out a breath and nodded, placing one hoof on the Changeling's shoulder. "I am. Thank you." She suddenly stopped, stiffening and her eyes going wide. "Cadence. We have to stop her. We need to find some way to restrain her, before..." She was interrupted by the pile of tables exploding apart, filling the room with a cloud of sawdust. When it cleared, Cadence was standing before them, body glowing as raw magic leaked off her very being. "Another sucker punch," she said, sniffing dismissively. "Well, what can you expect from the queen of cheap shots?" She pushed herself into the air, wings spreading wide, and all of the power concentrated itself in her horn. "Let's see how you handle me when I'm ready for you," she shouted with unmistakable eagerness. "Chrysalis." Twilight started to shout and move, only to find herself swept back by a hold leg. "Get behind me, Twilight!" cried the Changeling, and lit up her own horn. A shield sprang up before them, and Twilight's mouth dropped open. Chrysalis' shield was a wall of interlocking hexagons, a honeycomb of thick magical plates. Each section looked corrupted, holes opening and closing on their surfaces, but the magical signature of the spell was solid. Raw magic dripped off the shield, magic that should have floated away as a fog but was so heavy it flowed more like slime. And the entire structure shone with a brilliant, beautiful emerald light. Even as Twilight's eyes were widening in awe, Cadence fired. This wasn't some simple bolt from the tip. Her spell came from the entire length of the horn, a thick, concentrated beam of pure, destructive love. It crashed into Chrysalis' shield like a landslide of affection, splattering vicious pink hearts in all directions that slowly floated upwards and faded before being replaced by more. Twilight flinched back from the cataclysm of love, but the shield held like a rock. Chrysalis, though, clenched her jaw and squeezed her eyes shut at the impact. "You're doing it," said Twilight softly, then raised her voice. "Chrysalis, you're doing it. Keep it up, she can't last forever." "I can. If you stop distracting me," panted the Changeling. "Fools," bellowed Cadence, glaring at them from eyes swamped by the pink light of love. "Do you truly think you can defeat love? That there is an end to the amount of love in this world?" She lowered her head, amping up her power, and even more pink hearts filled the air. "It doesn't matter if you want this or not, Twilight. I will fill your heart with love." "Oh, no." Cadence's power increase was clearly too much for Chrysalis' shield, and even as Twilight watched it began to fall apart. It didn't crack the way a pony shield would, but the holes in its surface were becoming more real. A pink gas began to seep in, and she suddenly had to skip aside to avoid a heart that came floating past. "Twilight. I'm so sorry," groaned Chrysalis, now shaking and sweating with the effort of holding the shield in place. "Please, hold on, Chrysalis. We can. Wait." Twilight's eyes went wide as inspiration struck, and she bounded over to the Changeling's side, dodging some slowly wavering hearts in the process. She got up on her hind legs, putting one foreleg around Chrysalis for support, and stretched herself up until her head was level with the Changeling's. "Twilight, what?" Chrysalis started to say, turning to Twilight with fear and confusion in her eyes, and the pony interrupted her. "Let me help," she cried out. "Use my magic." Her horn lit up, magic flowing out to combine with Chrysalis. The beams twisted together, forming a corkscrew of green and magenta light that grew tighter and tighter until it merged at the shield. As it did, light blossomed once again, and 6 pointed magenta stars appeared over the holes in the shield, slowly pulsing. "We're doing it!" cried Twilight giddily. "We're going to." "No. I won't let you stop me from saving you, Twilight!" screamed Cadence. More magic poured out of her horn, flowing down to envelope her body, and the debris scattered about the floor below her began to rise into the air, caught up in the sheer amount of power she was putting out. The lights around the room, powered by magic, first flickered and then dimmed as Cadence's magical field began to interfere with theirs. With another scream, a brilliant nova light exploded off her body that battered and beat at the shield like waves tossed up by a hurricane. "We can hold it!" groaned Twilight, even as her magic began to falter, the stars on the shield shrinking and letting the magical love gas seep back in. Just a little longer. The shield suddenly began to grow unstable, and Twilight, hearing a rasping sound, looked over at Chrysalis and gasped. The changeling's mouth was open, sucking in the love that was flowing through the damaged shield, and even with Chrysalis's eyes half-lidded, Twilight could see the intensity of the power glowing within them. "Chrysalis? Chrysalis, stop!" Twilight tried shaking the changeling, to no effect. "That's pure love. You can't handle that much power." "Can't." "Stop," said the changeling faintly, with a sluggish shake of her head. "So much love. Need to feed." The end came quickly and spectacularly. Chrysalis lost all control of the magic she had siphoned and it surged into the shield, overloading it and blowing it apart in a burst of magical feedback that sent royal bodies flying in all directions. Silence reigned for a moment in the restaurant. Plaster dust drifted down from the ceiling, decorating the circular area in the middle of the dining room that had been swept clear by the blast. A table that had been teetering on 3 legs finally collapsed, and one miraculously intact plate rolled out of the wreckage. Then Cadence stood up. "Do you see, Twilight?" she said, walking slowly over to where her sister-in-law, now barely conscious, lay. "Love wins. Love always wins." She lit up her horn, holding her head high, tears of relief and joy starting to leak out of her eyes. "I saved you, Twilight. I save." Grulk. Grulkink. Her hooves lifted off the ground, her body wrapped in a bright green magical aura. She tried to struggle against the magic, legs flailing uselessly in slow motion, and then the glow intensified and she was held rock still. Carefully, gently, she was rotated onto her back, then turned upwards, to face a changeling queen nearly bursting with magical energy. "You're right," said Chrysalis, voice crackling and jumping with power. "Love does win." Cadence began struggling, managing some slight movements even against the power Chrysalis now wielded, and she tried to bring up her own magic once more. But she'd given too much of it to the changeling, and Chrysalis suppressed her efforts with ease. "This isn't fair," Cadence forced out as Chrysalis began carrying her to the other side of the room. "You don't deserve Twilight." She managed to get her lips up into a snarl. "You tried to steal my love from me. I deserve to steal yours." Chrysalis, utterly ignoring Cadence's ranting, had been scanning the far wall of the restaurant. Her eyes lit up, as she spotted a wide section that was relatively free of decorations or damage. Floating Cadence over, she gently pushed the princess through the wall. Chrysalis spent several moments inspecting the resulting pile of bricks. It didn't look like anything under them would be getting up anytime soon, so she nodded happily and turned away. Taking a deep breath and releasing it slowly, she let the excess magic she had collected flow away and dissipate into the air. Once it was gone. Well, most of it, waste not want not, she thought with an internal grin. She trotted over to Twilight's shifting body. "Easy there," she whispered gently, helping Twilight to her hooves. "Are you all right?" I think so," groaned Twilight, rubbing her forehead. "But my head feels like the time Pinky thought rock salt was a proper substitute for confetti in her party cannons." She wobbled, and Chrysalis carefully helped her sit down on her haunches. "I can't believe this," Twilight said with a sigh. "I never thought Cadence would attack me, like that." Twilight suddenly jerked upright, body quivering. "Oh no. Where is she? Is she going to?" "Shish, Twilight, relax." Chrysalis gently stroked Twilight's mane with one hoof. "We're safe. I took care of Cadence." What do you mean?" stammered Twilight, looking fearfully up at Chrysalis. "I mean," repeated the Changeling, giving a wide, fang-filled grin. "I took care of her." "Oh, no. No, no, no." Shaking, Twilight managed to stagger to her hooves. This earned her a disgusted sigh and eye roll from Chrysalis, who simply nudged her with a hoof and sent her back down to her haunches. "As you said earlier, give me at least some credit," the Changeling said dryly, grin now a mischievous smile. "I know what she means to you, even after all this. And I know how you feel about ponies. You like getting hurt, even if they might deserve it." She gestured at the opposite side of the room, where, on the other side of a roughly alicorn-shaped hole in the wall, a pink leg wearing a dented golden hoof cuff waved from a pile of bricks. "I'm fine," came Cadence's faint, unsteady voice, and then the ragged hole shed a few more bricks, burying the leg. "See? She's fine," said Chrysalis, offering a hoof to Twilight once more. Twilight took it, letting Chrysalis help her walk out of the debris she had landed in and towards the exit. "What a mess," groaned Twilight, rubbing at her head with her free hoof. "You know, it's technically treason. Or an act of war. To attack a princess like Cadence just did. You only got away with it because we were able to use that foreign wedding customs loophole. Cadence is also a princess, though, which means that law shouldn't apply to her either. That's why Lena wasn't executed after we subdued her with the elements. But ugh, she's officially a foreign princess, an ally, so it does actually apply. Does she have diplomatic immunity, I wonder? She does most of the negotiations for the Empire, from what I understand. Oh, Celestia and Luna aren't going to like this at all." Chrysalis giggled at her, and Twilight looked up with a frown. "This is all funny to you, isn't it?" "Kind of," admitted the Changeling. "But I'm mostly laughing at you. It's nice to see you like this. It's how I want to remember you." Yeah. Twilight sighed, and her whole body sort of flopped down even as she stayed upright. "Well, we can let the other princesses handle this. Let's go home." She started to trot forward, only to find herself stopped by the hoof she was holding. She looked back, puzzled, as the Changeling smiled at her. "No, Twilight." "What?" "I mean, I'm not going back to your castle with you. I'm returning to the hive, and I'm not coming back." But... Twilight dropped Chrysali's hoof, and the Changeling's smile warmed briefly before she turned away. "Twilight, when Cadence asked you if you love me, what did you say?" Chrysalis asked softly. "I said..." Twilight trailed off, then swallowed and finished, "I said I didn't know." "And when Cadence said she was going to remove my love for you, what did you say?" I. This time Twilight refused to continue, and Chrysalis finished for her. "You said I won't let you hurt my friend." She moved back, the same smile still on her face, and stopped in front of Twilight. "Twilight," she asked gently, "do you love me?" Twilight paused to lick her lips, before continuing in a hoarse voice. "I don't know." Chrysalis' smile didn't waver. "Then we've answered the question this whole night was about, haven't we?" She started to move away, and Twilight scrambled after her. Wait. We can try again," she pleaded desperately. "It's not fair. Cadence." She interfered. You didn't get an honest chance. Chrysalis paused, then turned back around. Twilight, she said again, do you love me? I don't know, said the pony, repeating herself as well. But I want to. I want to try. Do you want to try because you might love me? Or do you want to try because you don't want to hurt a friend? Asked Chrysalis with crushing finality. Twilight stood there, shaking her head slowly, and all she could do was whisper, I don't know. Chrysalis held her smile on Twilight for a moment, then bent forward and gently kissed the pony on her forehead. Goodbye. She turned away, moving slowly but with her head held high, towards the exit. Twilight stared after her, then tried to follow despite her stiff, pain-filled body. Wait, she called out, but Chrysalis continued until Twilight called out again. Wait, please. They stood there in silence, Chrysalis facing away, Twilight breathing hard. Finally, Chrysalis turned, peering at Twilight out of the corner of her eye. I'll contact the palace, get them to draw up some papers annulling our marriage. I'm sure Celestia will be happy to approve them. Chrysalis. Have no fear for your kingdom, either, continued the Changeling. Your hive and mine are allies, now and forever. I'll send a team of Changelings to be diplomats in my stead. If you ever need anything at all, let them know, and we will do all that is within our power to meet your desires. Except one thing. You can never contact me again. Twilight's eyes widened, body stiffening in shock. No, Chrysalis. I will retire to my quarters, and direct the hive from there, Chrysalis said, heedless of Twilight's protests. I have no plans to ever leave the chamber. The hive mind can be directed unconsciously, though. I need not be awake to monitor it. So one day, perhaps, I will go to the deepest spot of the hive, to burrow down and slumber deep under the earth for the rest of time. Just as Mother did, centuries ago. She stared into the past with far-off eyes, then faced forward once again and began walking. Chrysalis, no. The Changeling didn't respond, just continued to walk. The remnants of a plate crunch under her hoof. She had to sweep aside half a table with her magic, but she kept walking. Chrysalis, I am telling you to stop, shouted Twilight frantically. If you love me, then you have to come back here and talk to me. This time Chrysalis did stop, right at the door to the restaurant's lobby. I'm not coming back, Twilight, because I do love you, she said, not turning, and Twilight couldn't tell if she heard tears or a smile in that voice. And you deserve someone you can love. Suddenly, she was gone. Twilight heard the tinkling of the bell over the door, the faint buzz of wings that quickly faded, and then there was nothing. After some time had passed, Twilight noticed that she had raised her hoof, reaching after Chrysalis. She lowered it now, letting her entire body slump down to her haunches, and stared at the empty doorway. Chrysalis was gone. Twilight had spent so much time trying to make that happen, all because of a little misunderstanding. All because someone she thought was a monster had turned out to have a heart. She'd enlisted her mentor, her friends, their family, nearly every pony she knew in an effort to escape the marriage. She had even gone as far as agreeing to this dating idea, half hoping she could convince the Changeling that things weren't going to work out. And now Chrysalis was gone. She'd gotten exactly what she'd wanted.